visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping to India and Nepal offers the three countries an opportunity to discuss mutual interests and exchange views at the highest political level. What will be its outcome? Can it bring some new cooperative opportunities for these three countries? And where will China-India-Nepal trilateral relations head? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Dr. Zhao Hai, a researcher at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Atul Aneja, an associate editor at The Hindu. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to Dialogue. Atul, first of all, do you prioritize the importance of South Asia on the agenda of President Xi Jinping's visit, or do you think this is a good opportunity for China to take a second look at our bilateral relationship with Nepal and India?
I think it's a larger picture which is important, which is in South Asia as a whole, with India, of course, being the largest country in South Asia. So naturally, that becomes a very important element of the visit. And Nepal is also interesting. Because there are certain connectivity issues, I believe, which are going to be discussed or agreed upon during this visit. So it's very important now that how the entire regional equation is addressed, especially between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi, because of both countries having their specific areas of interest, not only in South Asia and beyond, and even globally when it comes to other questions like climate change, etc. How do we locate a bilateral relationship in the bigger picture of the region and the world? I think that's where the dialogue between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi is going to take place, and that's why it's highly important, not just bilaterally, but for the region and the world.
Shortly after President Xi Jinping took office about 6 years ago, he very quickly hosted a very important conference on our diplomacy with the neighboring countries. And for his agenda of the diplomacy in the new era, what do you think of the importance of South Asia? How does China position itself in its diplomatic strategy with this region, where we have a very dynamic emerging market of India?
Exactly. I think we have to look at this through three lenses. The first one is global one, and China is playing a growing role, a bigger role in the world. And China is also extending its Belt and Road Initiative particularly extensively in this area. And secondly, from the regional perspective, as Atul has pointed out, South Asia, its peace and stability, its growing population and economy is very important to China. And thirdly, from bilateral relations perspective, and China and India are growingly having see each other as a partner, and the economic relationship, and also on top of that, the political and strategic relationship are growing by the year. So now both China and India are in BRICS, and also they're both in the Shanghai Cooperative Organization. So it's getting very important for the two countries to sit down and have a strategic agreement on many important issues globally, regionally and bilaterally.
It seems, Atul, that there is a common vision and a consensus between New Delhi and Beijing about hosting or holding regular summit meetings, particularly after the new campaign success of Prime Minister Modi. But do you think, first and foremost, President Xi seizes this opportunity to first and foremost reinforce both the personal chemistry with Prime Minister Modi and to discuss the very important bilateral ties between India and China?
I think personal chemistry is vital. It's just a reinforcement, because already that personal chemistry has been established through earlier meetings, starting right from the time when they met at the BRICS summit in Fortaleza in Brazil. And that's been growing since then. And it was reinforced big time, both at Hamburg, before, in the teeth of the Doklam crisis, where a decision was taken to defuse it, and then very firmly done so during the Wuhan informal summit, which took place last year. So that personal chemistry is, I think, a very strong stabilizing factor between India and China. So that remains, and that will be reinforced. Then comes whether the confinement will be only to bilateral relations or beyond. I think both leaders realize that they are not just countries but civilizational states, and that's a very important link between these two, and therefore the need to look beyond. I think the real challenge now is to go beyond, and how do we manage our relationship as China, naturally with its growing economy and size, its interests spill over into South Asia, Indian Ocean, and so does India's as well. So how do we two work together to manage and coexist, in fact cooperate with each other? Last year in Wuhan, my final point here is that in Wuhan we agreed, the Chinese side proposed what is called the 2+1 formulation, which came to China-India plus, where the two countries discuss their strategic concerns first before going into a third country. Nepal was the first country where this 2+1 or China plus formulation was articulated. I think that is something we need to go into now. How do we manage when we go into Africa, when we go into Indian Ocean or in South Asia? So that will be the next challenge, and that can be done at the leadership level and give a very clear strategic direction of establishing cooperative relationship in what can be possibly contentious areas.
It's very interesting, isn't it, Dr. Zhao, that following the landmark conference in Wuhan between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping in the wake of Doklam crisis, that New Delhi could seriously consider China's proposal about 2+. For many Chinese policymakers, India remains the most important regional power in South Asia, but 2+ seems to be a modest challenge to what was traditionally held so dear by politicians in India.
I think we have to go back in time just a little bit. When back in 2014, 5 years ago, when President Xi visited India, I think President Xi built up a very good personal relationship with Modi when he visited his hometown and celebrated his birthday. And after that, Modi also visited China. However, at that time, I don't think the relationship has been upgraded to this level. I agree that the Wuhan meeting is critical because after some tension and crisis, both countries realized that they need to work together and to find out a way, particularly a platform, to realize both of their strategic goals. And China-India Plus is one of those mechanisms that can help both countries to realize their ambitions, both inside South Asia region and outside. So I think I agree with Atul that in many regions, not only in South Asia, because there's a diaspora of Indians and Chinese around the globe, in Africa, even in the Pacific islands. So in many areas, both countries and their peoples can work together on this platform. And of course, Nepal is one of the most important cases, and this visit will address that issue clearly, because when you have both influences and both civilizations influence countries and continents, for instance, in Southeast Asia, there's both Indian influence and Chinese cultural civilizational influence. They need to find two roots in those regions and work together. Otherwise, we will have a conflict in the new century, and that's bad for both countries.
Due to the impact of BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, particularly the growing importance of the internet economy, do you think this is an opportunity to also consider the idea of constructing India-China-Nepal economic corridor? To what degree do you think our Indian policymakers are ready to advance this idea of yet another economic corridor in South Asia?
I think in principle, yes. But the detailing is the one which is going to be crucial here, because there is a trust deficit still between the two countries, which needs to be worked out.
There's an issue of a mutual trust.
Mutual trust, and that is where the two leaders can give a direction.
Are you saying that there is a trust deficit between our two governments?
Not between the two leaders, but it has to be sort of percolated down the line. Our bureaucracies have to get involved with it. Systems and institutions have to start dialoguing with it. So, I mean, in principle, yes, but then you've got to start working step by step. How do you establish that goal? I think that is something which is still a work which needs to be done. I think we can start with the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar corridor, which is already a done deal. And that will build a lot of confidence. And then Nepal comes next. I think in principle, yes, because ultimately the Nepal corridor should join the eastern part of India. And then you have the whole corridor starting from East India right up to Tibet, and then you're down into the Belt and Road area. But now that is where I think it's crucially important that we have extensive dialogue, not just given the direction which the leaders give, then among academics, businessmen and others, because work has still not been done, and I think that is where we still have this gap. We don't talk to each other as much as we should among the civil societies and institutions. It's still a work in progress.
Brilliant politicians from both India and China have to take into consideration the controversies and the intricacy, for example, concerning the fact that Nepal is the most underdeveloped economy in South Asia, whilst India is a very dynamic catch-up economy. Now, having said this, Nepalese have their own concerns for being sandwiched between two biggest markets in this region, China and India. Yet, State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi said to his Nepalian counterpart, he suggested quietly that Nepal should seize this opportunity, taking India and China as a blessing instead of a curse for this weak economy. So what do you think of the concerns of Kathmandu?
I think, first of all, if you look at Nepal's economy after the 2015 earthquake, actually it's been growing very quickly. And under the leadership of the current Prime Minister, Oli, I think the overall economy is healthy, and also the strategy, global strategy and regional strategy of the country is also correct to balance India and China's influence and enlist help from both countries. And also, I think if you have that case and extrapolate the experience and the historical experience to the whole region, it is important to understand, I think, for Indians it's a good thing that China's Belt and Road Initiative and other economic ties with the region would help countries develop. And that would benefit India and the whole region, because poverty is one thing that leads to terrorism and instability in the region. So I think both countries should have a common interest in having the region develop more quickly and also having a more peaceful regional arena. So I think in that respect, Nepal could be a case, could be a model for other countries and also for India-China cooperation.
But the point in my understatement in raising the last question concerning Nepal and the fear that it will be sandwiched between the two economic giants is that, except for Pakistan, almost all other nations and economies in South Asia have their serious legitimate concerns about the deep-rooted Indian influence in what is called the backyard of New Delhi in South Asia. They need to look at the sensitivity of the issue of whether they are getting too close to Beijing too quickly so that New Delhi would register apparent dissatisfaction. What do you think of, say, these geopolitical concerns of your neighboring government?
That actually underscores the importance of this 2+1 and China-India plus, because that's where you address, frankly, your geopolitical concerns, India's as well as China's. And that dialogue and that mechanism has to work. Second thing is, I think it's important that we need to take an integrated view of the relationship. One track is influenced by another. For example, if there's going to be a corridor coming from China into India, well, I can see the security hawks in New Delhi saying that, today it's trade and commerce, tomorrow it can be troops. So should we look at resolving building confidence on the border? And that helps to reinforce the concerns. And then Nepal, I think we have to work probably on multiple tracks which have an influence on each other. So it may not be ideal to isolate one track and not the other. Though sometimes it's important that we do not, like for example on the economic side it's worked. We worked on the economic side and did not touch the border. But on certain others like Nepal and all, probably the two dialogues will have to merge somewhere. And that's where the leaders will give the direction.
I think it's important, just one thing, I think it's important, that's why the regional and multilateral organizations are very important, because other countries, particularly smaller countries, will feel safer politically and strategically staying in this super state organizations instead of being dominated by one great power or another, because they will succumb to their pressure.
Absolutely, and they need guarantees.
Thank you so much.
Nepal needs guarantees.
Thank you so much. We'll come back to examine whether there will be a breakthrough in our latest diplomatic campaign. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Needless to say that the structured geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China, as a result of unilateral and provocative moves by the White House during the presidency of Donald Trump, New Delhi has to take into consideration the concerns of Washington. And just recently, Prime Minister Modi visited the United States and hosted the conference, Howdy Modi, and President Trump showed up to show up the image of very friendly bilateral ties between Washington and New Delhi. Do you think India is using the geopolitical mistrust between Washington and Beijing to take advantage so that it will maximize its own economic stakes and geopolitical ones in South Asia?
I don't think so. Because if you look at the visits with the US, I mean, Prime Minister Modi had a very successful outing in Vladivostok with President Putin, and we declared what is called the Look Far East policy and investing in the Arctic. Then he goes to the US and now he meets President Xi Jinping. So it is not putting all your eggs in the American basket. That's not the way. And we also realize, at least it's my own view, that in the overall global structure, we are no longer in the unipolar moment. US is one of the poles among many others which have emerged. China is one, Russia is one. So we'll have to have a multi-vector diplomacy with each country. Now the question comes that India, for example, will never be dictated by the United States. I'll give you a very clear example. We are buying the S-400 missiles from Russia, and we have been threatened, not just pressurized by the Americans on this. But we are not going to buckle. That deal is going to go through because that
neither will Turkey buckle.
No, neither will Turkey. So we know where our strategic interests lie, and we're going to balance this. And nowhere is it in India's interest to join in a formulation which is aimed at containment of China. We are neighbors. There's no way. There are certain red lines. But within a certain framework, yes, there will be a cooperative relationship with the United States. You added a third complexity, which is the trade war, which is affecting both China and with India.
Is it an issue for India to decide?
We have a problem. We already have banned imports of certain agriculture products from the United States. And increasingly so, because of US...
My question is, does it sound like a big issue that you have to take side between the United States and China on global commerce?
Not yet.
No, not yet.
Not yet. But if we see the cycle of the way things are moving, well, tomorrow, the pressure coming on, for example, India's relation with Iran, and US using its domestic law against countries, including India, I think there is going to be a certain amount of balancing which India will have to do, and in its own national interest. And a strong relationship with China is a part of this balancing act.
What do you think of China's efforts to keep a balance between India and Pakistan?
Well, China has been trying to maintain peace and stability and also promoting development in South Asia for a long time now. And China sees the difficulties of these problems and don't want to injecting itself into the bilateral relations. Hopefully these issues can be resolved by both countries peacefully. I want to emphasize at this point that first of all, Pakistan's economy is really suffering in recent years, and India's economy is also slowing down. So that's why India recently cut its interest rate and also lower taxes and also opening up more sectors for foreign investment. So I think this so-called trade war between China and the U.S. is impacting global economy, and everybody suffers from this ridiculous trade war. So I think in that respect, China and India should stand together to fight against protectionism and this unilateralism. China also being sanctioned for the reason of the importing missiles from Russia, and also being sanctioned for other reasons, trade barriers. I think that's very important. For that reason, so I think countries in South Asia should stand together to maintain a multilateral world and openness of the region instead of facing each other, promoting nationalism domestically. And that's the worst thing we can expect, and that lead to war in many cases.
Other than the global concern of the U.S. presence, all politics are local. Let's look at, for example, our growing downward economic pressure. First of all, let's look at what it means to have the proposed extension of the Qinghai-Tibet Railway that may well be linked with Nepal. Do you think Nepal is ready to benefit from our infrastructure, particularly Qinghai-Tibet Railway? And that would be a very good opportunity and something that is doable for this small economy in South Asia.
Well, I hope it's going to be very constructive for that country and both for China and India, because we've witnessed what happened after the earthquake. It has damaged Nepal's economy greatly, and because of India blockade, these kind of humanitarian crisis deepened. And China signed the TTA with Nepal 3 years ago. Now, recently, it's been operational. And China will continue to build infrastructure, getting access into Nepal's market and help that country's economy. I think right now it's very important, it's critical for China and India to understand each other's strategic intention in that country to reduce mistrust. And that way, I think both countries can have more infrastructure access to Nepal, both from the south and from the north. And that country can benefit from both its biggest neighbors in the world. So I think it should be a positive sign instead of a negative struggle.
When we look at the issue of interconnectivity, which is in essence a very important part of our co-prosperity, or in forming what we call the community of shared future. Now, what do you think of the use of 5G, which is banned by the United States, but some of the allies of Washington across the Atlantic Ocean even go down further to consider 5G for their deployment of facilities on the periphery instead of for the core interests that concern the national security of Britain, Germany, France. What do you think of, say, the Indian blueprint for adopting the 5G generation of Huawei?
Well, I'm not sure regarding choices India will make, but the importance of 5G is underscored in India because we are entering into a new stage. I was in Shanghai recently and for a conference on IT, and the main discussion among Chinese companies like SenseTime, you've got big, huge companies in AI and other areas now, and Indian companies of trying to make Indian software for AI products, which will be enabled once you have 5G projects or 5G enabled smart cities and others which will come into play. So I think there's a massive opportunity on 5G once 5G is deployed between India and China. In fact, I see that Indian IT, which was more US-centric at one point of time, can be very easily China-centric because your advancement in AI is on the very, very front lines. So it's frontier technology and Indian software migrating from that pattern into this. Regarding Huawei and others, I think the trials are going to take place, and India's decision would be based on commercial reasons rather than anything else.
In the early days of India's economic reform and opening up, which was said to be 10 years later than China, now you not only enjoy the advantage of speaking very good English as a member of the British Commonwealth, but also the big data, because you are the third biggest single internet market other than China and the United States. So in an age of big data, when we look at the prospects of AI development, China is already past the stage of a labor-intensive, mostly polluting manufacturing stage. We are looking, we set our eyes on AI. Do you think India has still some margin, has some kind of a long road to walk?
It's a very uneven development in India. Like in issues like AI, or whether it is coming to software, we are at the very front line. But when it comes to manufacturing, the basic manufacturing, there's a huge gap because China moves into Industry 4.0, which is the highest level in the world.
But do you think the use of digital technology would quickly close the gap?
May or may not be, but I do think that there is a critical need in India of Chinese investments to go in the manufacturing center, because that's where we are going to generate employment and mass employment, which Make in India project of Prime Minister Modi is all about. I don't see any other country in the world, and I'm looking at the US, Europe, Japan, other than China, which can play a maximum role, because we need foreign capital here to revitalize our manufacturing. I think that's a symbiotic relationship, because I do think the Chinese have excess capital which can be easily absorbed into India, and infrastructure development from China into India. You are just first rate in railways, ports, airports, we know that. So that is a critical need. If India has to grow from 7% to say 10%, we need that infrastructure, and I see no other country apart from China filling in that critical gap which India has, apart from its advances in certain other advanced areas.
Other than the specific issues of interconnectivity through the use of digital technology and adoption of Huawei, Dr. Zhao, what do you think of the priorities on the agenda of Prime Minister Modi following the campaign success? What are the most urgent issues for him to shore up the Indian economy, which is a trailing which faces, of course, the global economic downward pressure?
Right now, the problem is investment. I think the weakness of the Indian economy is energy dependence. So far, I think India's energy dependence rate is probably higher, even higher than China. Both India and China very much depend on foreign oil and gas. So that's one of the things we can cooperate on, but also that's a weakness, a vulnerability that we have to handle. And secondly, I think importantly, at this environment, when global economy is slowing down, one of the critical problems for India is how to attract foreign investment. And that's why it is critically important for India to move forward with RCEP, which China is also promoting. If we can realize that by the end of this year and next year we can secure more trade facilitation between the two countries and throughout the whole region. So I think that's very important. And the third thing is that Atul has already mentioned technology cooperation and other areas. I think it's very important for pharmaceutical industry, for instance, and also cultural industry. India's movie is very much welcomed in China, and then China's cultural elements also welcomed in India. So I think there's great, massive potential for developing more trade between the two countries, and that's going to help India to grow even faster and help China to stabilize its economy. I'm very hopeful because by 2018, India and China trade has already reached $80 billion very quickly, $90 billion. Very quickly, I think it's going to overpass $100 billion, and hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, we can double, even triple that.
With that, we come to the end of this edition. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.